Hello, welcome back to another episode. In the first two episodes of the Apple miniseries Blackbird, Jimmy Keene had a sequence of ups and downs, including nearly seeing the death of a childhood friend, being detained, and then being secretly hired by the FBI to get a confession from Larry Hall. In addition to these two, we follow FBI agents Brian Miller and Lauren McCauley as they work to ensure that Larry is never allowed to reintegrate into society and resume committing crimes. Jimmy begins by keeping an eye on Larry from a distance. Then, we see Jimmy being questioned by Dr. Aaron Zitcherman about how he is adjusting to life in jail. He describes it as confusing. Jimmy, who is beginning to have second thoughts about the entire endeavor, is persuaded by Zitcherman that Larry deserves to remain behind bars and that the outside world is safer without him there. He explains the typical rhythms of the jail, what happened to the prisoner who shared Jimmy's cell, and offers him his personal number, which will serve as an emergency passcode in case everything goes wrong.
Wait. If things go completely south someday, how do I reach you or the warden?
Jimmy tries to talk to Larry while picking up his medications, but the plan fails miserably. Instead of sending a qualified expert, Miller confronts McCauley about her entire scheme to get Jimmy to Springfield and force a confession from Larry. She continued by saying that she basically plans to follow Miller's 1994 course of action in order to find a solid charge against Larry that will keep him in prison. Miller tells McCauley the details of his previous meeting with Larry, during which he began singing. Jimmy tries to talk to Larry at lunch, but he once more ignores him. Jimmy's cover is blown when James pays him a visit because he isn't supposed to be a family guy. He is a cop's kid now, and the jail is aware of this. James feels bad for going to see him, but Jimmy consoles him. He is informed by James that he will remain in Springfield for the time being. The following time, Jimmy instructs him to respect the visiting hours. Jimmy asks Mr. Carter to keep this information to himself because if the convicts learn that he is an ex-son of a cop, he isn't sure how it would come back to harm him. He is advised to present himself to Vincent Gigant and mention Carter when doing so, since Carter informs him that Vincent is looking for him. Larry had been fired several times as a result of his reputation as a serial confessor.
A hunting knife, coils of rope, a ski mask, gloves.
As McCauley and Miller discover when they examine the specifics of the Rietler case. Back in the prison yard, Jimmy befriends Vincent and gains his admiration for his demeanor. After that, Jimmy tries to approach Larry once again, but is unsuccessful, and pursues him to the TV room to watch a show. Someone changed the channel to prevent that viewing. In order to gain Larry's trust, Jimmy confronts the brute and beats the hell out of him, risking time in jail. As a result of that violent confrontation, Jimmy gets placed in solitary prison as a result. Later, when he gets back to his cell, Larry is attempting to talk to him, and he doesn't let go of the chance to engage with him. They begin discussing vehicles and vans. Jimmy is taken to his cell when Carter stops the conversation to speak with him. Carter begins by discussing Vincent's trust in hazy terms and how Jimmy may be responsible for it if he violates it. He is urged to get to the point by Jimmy. Carter then brings up James and his time spent working as a police officer. When Jimmy goes to see if Larry has heard anything after Carter leaves, he discovers him sound asleep. So he brings up the subject of Civil War reenactments to start the conversation again. His attempt to change the subject to Larry and Gary is motivated by McCauley's suggestion that Jimmy act as Gary in order to have direct access to Larry's thoughts. However, the jail schedule prevents even that from happening. The next day, Jimmy approaches James for financial assistance and starts to suspect things won't work out. Nevertheless, he develops a scheme to get a kilo of drugs through the prison and into the jail in order to pay Carter. Jimmy and Larry talk about the Civil War reenactments and start bonding over them. He then starts to talk about how many fields there are in the world and advises Jimmy to take notice the next time he travels by plane. Jimmy smoothly transitions into loving a girl, and Larry latches onto that. Carter interrupts their conversation again. As soon as Larry exits the room, Carter tells Jimmy that Vincent and his men cracked his cheekbone so that he could continue working in the prison. That means he needs his money quickly to pay off Vincent, or else he's going to be killed. Jimmy assures him that he's going to get his money because he plans to move the drugs that James is going to bring in. Larry confesses to his therapist that he is befriending Jimmy because he doesn't look through him but looks at him. Over a few beers, McCauley and Miller talk about Larry. Miller claims that the reason they haven't been able to discover the victims of Larry's crimes is because he buried them while constructing construction sites. According to McCauley, that may be the case, or Larry may simply enjoy telling stories. Because Larry spends most of his time in the boiler room, he takes Jimmy there. Jimmy tries to pique his interest by asking him about the biggest things he has ever had to clean up while working as a janitor. The moment Larry begins to discuss bodily fluids, Jimmy believes he is about to learn something about his misdeeds. He does, but it's worse than you can imagine because he starts talking, in very graphic terms, about raping girls. Jimmy tries to get down to his level to keep him talking, but they are interrupted by Coburn. When they meet, James tells Jimmy that all the drugs have disappeared. Jimmy becomes aware that he has once again deceived James when James blatantly admits that Danny stayed at the home where the drugs were supposed to be. Jimmy learns that Carter is no longer in prison as he returns to his cell. As Miller begins to grasp the link between Larry's suspected murders and his dives into junkyards, he experiences a light bulb moment. Macaulay sees Jimmy in the guise of his girlfriend, and he informs her that they haven't discussed anything significant yet. Then, Jimmy informs her of the Carter predicament and requests $10,000 from her to keep his cover intact. Macaulay says that's impossible. Jimmy realizes that there's no way around this whole situation, and that the only way through is through. So, he decides to stay there, face the consequences, and get a confession from Larry. Thanks for watching. Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to